I'm Eva, in a narrow brick townhouse in Boston with a sloped roof and a tiny yard where mint grows between the stones. The house is old and friendly. The stairs creak in two places, and the kitchen window opens toward a maple tree that scrapes the glass when the wind is strong. I keep my shoes by the door and my wedding dress in a garment bag on the closet rod, simple and white, paid for with my own money, $3.90 saved in small bits. I like quiet mornings, black coffee, and a list on the fridge. My younger sister, Lily, lives in New York. People say she has a golden glow, and maybe it's true. Rooms seem to lean toward her. When she called me last spring, I was sanding a patch of wall by the doorway. She said she had picked her wedding date. She said it like good news should land soft. When she said the day, I had to sit down on the step stool. It was the same day Marcus and I had already booked in Portland, Maine, at a hall near the harbor with big windows. We sent our deposit, I said. The band, too. I felt drywall dust in my throat. She laughed a little, not unkind, and said their venue was locked. She said our parents were thrilled for her and that schedules were hard to move. The call ended with sister talk that sounded normal, but when I set my phone down, I saw two pale thumbprints in the dust. I wiped them away with the hem of my shirt and told myself to breathe and be plain. A week later, Mom and Dad took me to dinner on Charles Street. They were dressed up the way they dress for church on holidays. The bill was $118, and Dad pushed his card over the small plate like he was sliding a choice he had already made. He cleared his throat and said they had to pick one ceremony to attend, and that Lily needed them more. Mom nodded and called me my steady girl, which is another way to say, you can take care of yourself. I folded my napkin and said, I understand. I walked home along the river and called Marcus. He is the kind of man who checks the air in your tires without saying so. He listened to the whole story with small sounds that told me he was still there. Then he said, we'll build something that feels like us. I loved him in that moment in a deeper way because he didn't try to fix the people. He just reached for the day. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote a new plan at the top of a yellow page. There is a gray salt box house in Portland that I have loved since I was a girl. Every summer we drove past it on our way to the beach, and I promised myself I would live with a porch like that. 5 years ago, when it went on the market, I put down $120,000 and took on a mortgage that asks $1,800 each month. I learned to tile, to caulk, to paint straight lines. I kept a jar on the counter and fed it dollars until the glass turned green, then paid for a roof repair and a better sink. So I moved our wedding from the hall to my own house. I called friends, not many, only the ones who have carried groceries with me in the rain. Jenny said she would bake the lemon cake for $85. Thomas offered music with 2 friends for $2,000. A farmer with a truck said she'd bring peonies and herbs for $1,200. My old roommate now lives in Europe. She mailed a card and slipped in a gift of £500 with a note that read, for light. I taped my list to the fridge. I looked at it and felt the floor of my life hold firm. I woke before sunrise and drove from Boston to Portland with Marcus, the trunk full of twine, cloth napkins, and a coil of cafe lights I found on sale for $120. The saltbox house waited the way a good friend waits. Quiet, solid, sure. When I opened the front door, the scent of cedar from the new shelves I had built last month slipped into the hall. I touched the banister I had sanded down and stained myself, a warm brown that matched the old floors.
Home, I said.
Marcus carried the boxes to the kitchen and put on coffee. He is a morning person. He hums when he measures grounds. I set my notebook on the table and read the plan again. The lines neat and simple. By 8, the yard was a soft bustle. Jenny arrived first, hair in a scarf, guarding her lemon cake like a crown. She set it on the porch table and sprinkled a little sugar on top so it would catch the light. You did this, she said, not meaning the cake. I squeezed her hand. Thomas came next with his upright bass and 2 friends, Owen and Rachel, each with a case. He ran a quick line and the wood sang. The farmer with a truck, her name is Alma, rolled in behind them, buckets of peonies and rosemary sliding in the bed. The total for flowers came to $1,200, which I had tucked in an envelope labeled in blue ink. I paid her on the porch, and we laughed like old neighbors even though we met last week. Inside, I made the front rooms bright. I lifted the blinds, washed the window glass until the maple tree outside looked close enough to touch, and spread white cloth on the entry table. I hung 3 frames on the wall, 1 photo of the house from years ago, 1 flyer from the listing when I bought it, and a last frame for words I still needed to write. The kitchen looked ready for a feast even before the food came. Olives, bread, roasted carrots from a corner market, and a stack of plates we rented for $150. I wrote place cards with a calm hand, the names of people who had never asked me to be less: Jenny, Thomas, Grace, Pastor Ellen, and a handful of others. When I stepped back, the rooms looked like a clear thought. Marcus handled the practical work outside. He measured the distance between the maple and the porch beam and strung the lights in 2 straight lines. He checked each bulb like a father checks bike tires. Our neighbor, Henry, came through the side gate with a bundle of extra chairs and a grin. "Consider it an early gift," he said, and refused the $60 I tried to press on him. I made a note to slip a bottle of good wine on his porch later. The lawn smelled green and sweet. The long table we rented for $200 stood in the center, like a promise. It would warm in the sun. Around noon, I drove to the harbor to pick up bread and a last-minute order of small pies Grace had arranged, for apple, for blueberry, $96 in cash. The city felt kind to me. Portland is not big, but it holds water and light in a way that steadies the chest. On the way back, I stopped at the post office and found a late card from my old roommate in Europe. She wrote, "Keep building," and tucked another 100-pound inside, which made me laugh in the car because it felt like the universe tipping its hat. I slid the note into my wallet next to the grocery list. Back at the house, I wrote the words for the 3rd frame in my neatest print. I kept them true and short. "This home is mine." I made it with my hands and with help from friends. "Enter with love." I placed the frame on the entry wall and checked the sight line from the yard. Anyone stepping through the door would see it first. For the first time since Lily took my date, I felt a calm that did not wobble. The day was not a contest. It was a circle I had drawn with care. If Mom and Dad came by, they would find more than a venue. They would find me, steady, present, and standing in my own light in America, with a house that knew my name. I woke before the sun and lay still, listening to the old house breathe. The maple rubbed the window like a soft drum. Marcus was already in the kitchen, measuring coffee with that steady way of his. I went downstairs and found 2 mugs waiting, the good ones we save for happy mornings. He kissed my cheek and asked if I'd slept. I told him almost. We ate toast with honey, and I checked the list I had taped to the fridge: lights, chairs, candles, music, vows. I had copied the vows on a clean card with a black pen that cost $3. I traced the last line with my finger: "I will build with you," and felt my heart settle. By 8, the house was moving. Jenny came through the gate with her lemon cake in a white box, her hair tied up in a scarf. She put the box on the porch table and opened it like a secret. The cake shone a little under a thin coat of sugar, simple and bright. "I brought extra lemons," she said, waving a small bag, "in case we want more zest." Thomas followed with his upright bass, Owen with a guitar case, and Rachel with a small piano in a black suitcase. He tuned a low note that made the porch floor hum. Alma rolled up in her truck with more peonies and herbs than we ordered. She shrugged and said, "Overage is on me," and I still tried to give her $30 for the trouble. She pushed my hand away and told me to save it for a good bottle of wine. Inside, the rooms felt clean and calm. I opened the windows and let the sea-smelling air move through the front room. I set the framed note in the entry: "This home is mine. Enter with love," and wiped a thumbprint from the glass. Grace stopped by early with a box of small pies she had picked up from the bakery, and she slid a folded list across the table: flavors, servings, a neat circle around blueberry. I tucked $96 into an envelope for her and wrote her name on the front. She kissed my forehead like family and left for her shift. At 9, my phone buzzed. It was Mom, "We're at Lily's hotel," she wrote. "Her hair is perfect. Dress is perfect." She added a heart. I could hear the hotel room in my head, the steam, the hairspray, the clicking shoes, the bright talk I used to chase like sun on a wall. I typed 3 words, "I'm happy for you," and set the phone face down on the table. Marcus was winding the cafe lights we had bought for $120 around the porch beam. He looked in, reading my face the way he reads a level. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said, and I meant it. I had built a day that could hold me. The neighbors trickled through the side gate. Henry brought a stack of extra chairs and refused the $60 I tried to press into his hand, then fixed a wobble in the long table with a twist of his wrist. Pastor Ellen waved from the sidewalk and came in to bless the yard in her light voice. No fuss, just a small prayer that sounded like kindness. The yard grew lovely in simple ways. We tied cloth napkins with twine. We set candles in jars I had washed and dried on the porch steps. Thomas ran a quiet rehearsal of Autumn Leaves, while Owen checked the power strip. The maple leaf shadows went slow across the grass. At 10:30, the sky went wide and blue. I slipped upstairs to dress. The mirror on my closet door showed a woman who looked like me, only steadier. The gown was plain and right, the $390 that I paid piece by piece now, a white line of trust down my back. I pinned my hair with 2 pearl pins and stood for a minute by the window, breathing. In the yard, someone laughed. The sound came up like a blessing. My phone rang at 11.
It was Dad.
I stared at the screen for a beat and then answered. "We're going to swing by," he said, like it was nothing, like it was a stop on the way to the grocery store. "Just to see your place. We can only stay a minute. Your mother wants to check the setup." His voice had a careful shape. I looked at the house around me. The floors I had sanded, the trim I had painted, the frames I had hung. "Drive safe," I said. "We'll be here." I went downstairs and told Marcus, and he nodded. He squeezed my hand once and went to plug in the lights. The bulbs bloomed one by one, soft and warm. Jenny straightened the cake stand. Alma tucked rosemary around the base of the peonies so the stems would smell like a garden. I set the front door wide and stood a moment in the entry, the 3 frames making a clear story on the wall, the old house, the way it came to me, and the words I chose. I heard a car slow outside, tires and gravel, a door closing. The yard went quiet in that listening way a room has before a first note. Then the side gate clicked. They stepped through the side gate at noon, Dad in a navy suit, Mom in a champagne dress that looked expensive, their faces bright with hurry. For a second, they didn't see me. They saw the long wooden table under the maple, the cafe lights strung from the porch beam, the jars of candles lined like little moons. They saw Jenny's lemon cake shining on its stand and Thomas's upright base leaning against a chair like it had been here forever. Then they looked past the yard and into the house, because I had left the front door wide. Their feet slowed. Mom touched Dad's arm. It was like the air itself told them to be quiet. They crossed the threshold and stopped in the entry. The 3 frames hung straight and simple on the wall, the old photo of the gray salt box, the creased flyer from the year I bought it, and the note I had printed neat and true. "This home is mine." I made it with my hands and with help from friends. "Enter with love." I watched Mom reach toward the glass as if the words were warm. Dad folded his mouth like a man chewing a thought. In that pause, I felt 30 years of smallness loosen, thread by thread. Pastor Ellen waited near the porch with her book. Marcus stood beside me, solid as a doorpost, his hand steady at my back. "I didn't know," Mom said. Her voice was soft, not sharp. She let her fingertips rest on the frame as if it were a wrist she wanted to feel a pulse in. "You did all this." Her eyes slid, trim shelves the tile I had set under the kitchen window. There was a kind of awe in her face I had never seen there, a shift like night turning into morning without anyone noticing the line. "I did," I said. "With help." I nodded toward our neighbors, toward Alma with her flowers, toward Henry with his lone chairs. "With love." Dad stepped farther in and turned slowly, like a man in a museum. He reached out and touched the banister I had stained. He looked at my hands then, and I think he saw the small scars and the paint that never fully leaves the skin. Out in the yard, the music began, a low run from Thomas that felt like a heartbeat. Pastor Ellen opened her book. Our people sat, Jenny and Grace and Owen and Rachel and Henry, a dozen more who know how to show up without making a speech. I walked Mom and Dad back to the porch. "We can't stay," Dad started, the habit of excuse already forming, and I cut it gently with a nod. "I understand," I said, and this time it wasn't a shield. It was a door left open. We took our places under the maple. The vows were simple and right. The wind moved the cafe lights in a slow shimmer. Marcus's voice did not shake. Mine did, once, at the line I had copied in my neat hand, "I will build with you." When Pastor Ellen said, "You may," the yard answered with a ripple of claps that felt like rain after a hot day. I could hear a gull call from the harbor, and somewhere the bell counted noon. Mom's hands were to her mouth, and Dad was clapping too hard, like a man who suddenly remembered he was strong. After the kiss, we turned and saw them still standing there. Mom came forward first and touched my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. She slid a white envelope into my palm as if it might fly away. "It's not much," she whispered. $300. For paint, or for nothing at all." Dad cleared his throat and added another envelope, $200 in crisp bills, folded once. "For light bulbs," he said, trying for a joke that didn't quite land. I breathed in and felt the shape of forgiveness settle in my chest. Not a grand thing, just a steadying. They stayed long enough to cut the cake. Jenny sliced neat wedges and pressed a fork into each plate. Alma tucked rosemary around the serving tray so every bite smelled like a garden. Thomas played Autumn Leaves, the low notes walking us through a gentle hour. Mom asked how much the band cost, the flowers, the chairs, as if money might help her understand the size of a day. I told her the numbers plainly, $2,000 for music, $1,200 for flowers, $600 for chairs, and watched her eyes do a quiet math that had nothing to do with sums. When it was time for them to go, we walked them to the gate. Mom looked back at the frames one more time, the old house, the flyer, the words. "We'll drive to New York now," she said, and I nodded. "Tell Lily I said love," I answered. Dad put his hand on my shoulder, a careful weight. "You made something beautiful," he said. It was not an apology, but it was true, and that was enough for the moment. They left in a soft hurry, the way people do when they are splitting themselves in two. We spent the afternoon in light. We ate bread and olives and small pies. We danced on the grass until the shadows grew long. When evening came, Marcus and I stood on the porch and counted the cards at the kitchen table because houses need roofs and futures need fuel. There were dollars from friends, a 50-pound note tucked in from my old roommate in Europe, and scribbled wishes that made us laugh. I put the envelopes in a clean tin and slid it into the pantry beside the flower. The lights hummed. The maple lifted its dark hands against the sky. I looked at the frames in the entry. Past, threshold, promise, and felt the house breathe deep, the way a home does when it knows it is finally loved back.